Hello and welcome back to the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. I'm Shaw Local Bears beat reporter Sean Hammond. He is sports enterprise extraordinaire Michael Dwojak. We are in week 2 of the Bears coaching search. There's obviously been a lot of names thrown out there. If you've been paying attention, you know that already. We're going to talk about hopefully all of them. I think I got them all on the list. Michael, it's hard to keep track. There's so many names right now.
Yeah, there are a lot of names, and it's interesting just to kind of watch this whole thing unfold. Who's coming, who's not coming. Why are they doing it this way? The wide net and all that kind of stuff. There's if you wanted a pretty straight and narrow bear search and kind of hoping to get some any answers pretty quickly, you're not going to get that.
Yeah, obviously the Patriots went with Mike Vrabel. They did. Comparatively, like based on how the rules are aligned now and the way this works nowadays, that was a really fast hire. I know back in the day they used to hire coaches in 3 or 4 days, but doing it in less than a week is highly unusual nowadays. And I think some Bears fans might have panicked a little bit seeing that. Like, okay, Vrabel was we were talking last time we were on here that he was in the top tier. And obviously when you see one of your top tier coaches fly off the board, yeah, that maybe incites a little bit of panic there. But I don't think that's necessarily has to be the case because there's a lot of good names still on the list. And really, that felt like it was meant to be between Vrabel and the Patriots. Pretty much the minute the Patriots fired Gerard Mayo.
Yeah, the Mike Vrabel thing, I kind of give the Bears and other teams kind of a pass. That seemed to be an arranged marriage. That seemed to be like something that most were really interested pretty quickly. So, and obviously there's still concerns, obviously, about the Rooney Rule and how the Patriots went around the process. But that's one where I'm kind of like, okay, like I'm fine. Like, yes, you would have liked to have brought in Vrabel, when he was done with his Week 8 before his Week 18 contract was done, and you would have liked him to maybe come into your house, to Alice Hall and see what they're doing, but. At the end of the day, I don't think that one's a big one. I think that one's pretty much Vrabel and the Patriots. He's a Hall of Famer in that organization. It always seemed destined that he was going to take over that program. So that's one where I'm kind of like, okay, whatever. Like, I'm not too worried about it.
And the other big name that's been in the news this week is Mike McCarthy. The Cowboys and McCarthy have parted ways. We didn't know if that was going to happen last week. It seemed like the Cowboys were not the reporting was that they were not allowing McCarthy to interview elsewhere. But for whatever reason, that all fell apart. And he's a free agent. He met with the Bears on Wednesday, I believe. And he met in person, too, which seems notable. Yeah, look, he's a coach who wins. Like you can't ignore the record. I know that he's you can if you're the Bears, yes. If you're George McCaskey, yes, he was the Packers head coach. I think you can get over that. Like that's at this point, that's ancient history. 5 years in the NFL is a long time. And you can argue whether or not he's a difference maker in the postseason, I think. But look, his football teams win. Even, when Dak Prescott was healthy, they win. They won in Dallas. Even when Dak was hurt this year, I think they exceeded expectations with Cooper Rush in there. I don't know if that's the direction this thing's going to go, but I think you have to take him seriously as a candidate, Michael.
Yeah, you do have to take him seriously. And, we're going to play a fun game here where we're going to play real or no real with all 20 Bears candidates. And we'll get into every candidate and kind of talk about what they bring and, whether they are a serious person for this job. But, the Bears, flying him in and, taking him out for dinner and all that kind of stuff, that already kind of shows how different this process has been compared to, previous coaching searches. So they are taking him seriously. I do know that, a lot of people are making a lot out of, Mike McCarthy getting an invitation to come to Hallis Hall. No coach is allowed to come into Hallis Hall if they have a contract for the 20th. Even if your team is out of the playoffs, you're not allowed to go to Hallis Hall until the 20th. So, that's important context to have. Obviously, Ron Rivera and Mike McCarthy are the only ones to kind of come in to Hallis Hall for that because they don't have any contracts. But it's interesting, right? Because it's something that we thought last week, with Mike McCarthy. Are the Cowboys, they're not going to let him talk to the Bears. is he a real candidate? What did he really do? But if you look into the stats and if you look into the rankings, you see a lot of impressive things. The playoff wins, you would like more than that. Obviously, he's won a Super Bowl, but that was roughly, 13 years ago. So, he's an interesting candidate, and obviously we'll get more into it once we break things down.
Yeah, that would be from a storyline perspective, the former Packers head coach who has a street named after him right beside Lambeau Field. That would be a crazy, crazy story if he winds up being the guy. As you alluded to, we're going to play a little game here. But first, if you're with us here on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. That's a great way to support the show. We would really appreciate that. If you're listening on, go for it, Michael. Get the thumb. There we go. Apparently it only likes me.
People listening to the podcast don't know what the hell.
Yeah, if you're listening after the fact, a little thumb comes up when we put our thumb up on the screen. So you can just picture that. But if you do want to join us live, keep an eye out on our Twitter pages. I'm at Sean_Hammond. He's at MDwojak94. We're going to let you know when we're going live. We're going to still try to keep doing this at least once a week during the off season for the foreseeable future. There's plenty to talk about here with the coaching search and whatnot. Also, if you are listening on Apple or Spotify, leave us a review. That's another great way to support the show. And as always, no matter where you're listening, be sure to head to shawlocal.com. Read all of our stuff over there. Please consider subscribing. That is the number one best way to support us. And we appreciate you guys jumping in here. We got lots of thoughts and comments in the chat. Rick Gonzalez says he still wants Ben Johnson as the head coach. Wouldn't be mad with Mike McCarthy. Mike Johnson says that Ben Johnson reminds him of Nagy. We can talk about whether we agree with that or not when we get to Ben Johnson on our list, Michael. He also says that Mike McCarthy reminds him of John Fox. Look, there's parallels for a lot of these coaches. I think that's fair. Obviously, you don't want a return of the Fox debacle. That was. You can argue whether that was a coach who was basically packing it in and just trying to get to retirement. But I don't know that was necessarily. I don't know that's necessarily what you're going to get with Mike McCarthy. He still seems hungry to me. Some other thoughts in the comments. Let's see. Thank you guys for joining us. Erica says no Mike McCarthy. I'd rather have Monken or Carroll. I do think that it's interesting. I wonder where the sense of urgency with the in-person interview is coming from. Is that Mike McCarthy really, really wants a job and he's available to fly wherever the heck, he's free. His week is clear. I do wonder why, he would be in person and Pete Carroll is not. That's fair to wonder. We can talk about, let's just dive right into our list here, Michael. Like we said, like Michael previewed, we're going to just go down the whole list. I got them alphabetically by last name. We're going to say, are they a real candidate or are they not a real candidate? And we'll see which ones we agree on, which ones we disagree on. You guys can chime in the comments if you want. We'll throw some of your thoughts up on the screen as well. Let's start, like I said, alphabetical by last name. We're going with Joe Brady, the Bills offensive coordinator. Michael, what are your thoughts on Joe Brady?
I think Joe Brady is a real candidate, right? And I think, it's kind of interesting to look at Joe Brady. Obviously, he's been in charge of that offense for a year and a half, and you have the important context with a lot of these offensive coordinators of you have Josh Allen as your quarterback, right? Like, obviously, that helps.
Yeah,
he's a freak of nature. He's an MVP candidate. He's a very great quarterback. So you need to put that into context. But I think there is also some of the context of that offense wasn't clicking with a lot more talent before, Brady took over, right? Like that team had Diggs and they were just struggling and, they made the playoffs. They've been able to run the AFC East for a little bit here, but, it just seemed like Josh Allen kind of clicked a little bit when he had a little bit, not that he doesn't have talent on this team, but, when he didn't have the superstar wide receiver and he brought in Joe Brady. So, it'll be interesting to see, I think he's a real candidate. I think you talked to him. I think you talked to him about what he did with Josh Allen when he took over. What was his priorities when he took over? What did he learn from previous, when he kind of got elevated into the position after Dorsey was fired? Like, those are all important questions for the Bears to ask because I think you'll see in my general answers here that the Bears need to focus on an offensive-minded coach for Caleb Williams, not only for Caleb Williams, but also just to kind of have some stability. I don't think you really want to have, a defensive guy be hired, and then you have the Bears offense do well, and then that OC becomes a coaching candidate, and then you go through the whole cycle all over again. I want stability if I'm the Bears for Caleb Williams, so that's why I'm really leaning toward an offensive coach, and that's why when you're talking about Joe Brady, I think he's a real candidate, and that you're really trying to learn a lot from.
Okay, we're on the same page here. I have Joe Brady as a real candidate as well. Now, there are some concerns. Like if you're concerned about if age matters, if Pete Carroll's age matters, I think you would say the same argument on the other side. I mean, Joe Brady would be the youngest head coach in the NFL. He's 35 years old. Yeah. He's been a coordinator for basically 3.5 seasons at the NFL level. Now, I know he's worked with some good quarterbacks. He worked with Joe Burrow at LSU in 2019 when they won the national title. He's obviously worked with Josh Allen. I think those experiences are real. Like he's clearly helped Josh Allen and that offense click. Now I do wonder if maybe he, is he the next Ben Johnson? Is he the guy who's going to be the hot candidate a year from now, 2 years from now? I do wonder if maybe he's a year away, but I do have him as a real candidate. I do think he's going to be a real candidate and should be seriously considered.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He, I've heard, I forget who it was, the Bills, or the Athletic, but he kind of compared him to Matt Nagy a little bit, where he talked about
Michael, I'm getting a little bit of an echo here. I don't know, guys, if you hear that in the comments. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, let me know if there's an echo, and I'll unplug this microphone. It seems to be causing issues the last couple of weeks. But I have heard the comparison of Brady kind of being like Nagy. So it'll be interesting to see if that ends up being then maybe.
Yeah, we're still getting an echo, Michael. Sorry about that.
All right, no, unplug.
Yeah, I do think that look, anytime you're hiring an offensive coordinator, I think it's fair to be concerned about what happened with Matt Nagy, but these guys are all different. They all come from different experiences. I do think that Joe Brady's maybe a year away still, but we'll see. Like Ben Johnson talked this week about how he used that summer and used basically when he decided not to take the Commander's job last year, he used that to come up with what he wants this thing to look like. He really thought about that over the summer, over the offseason. I think that's maybe something that Joe Brady should be doing this offseason if he doesn't get a job. Okay, we're going to move over to Thomas Brown is the next one on our list. I'll kick this off. I'm going to say not a real candidate because of the way that this season ended. I mean, I love the energy. I love the vibe he brings to the table. I think Thomas Brown, the interim Bears head coach, will get a shot to be a head coach in the NFL. I actually do believe that. I just don't know if it's going to be the Bears right now. I just feel like the way that we thought the positive vibes were there, and then it just wasn't when they came out for that 49ers game and those couple of games after they fired Matt Eberflus. And if you can keep him in some way, I think the Bears would be thrilled with that, but I don't know if they're going to have that chance. I don't think that you necessarily are just going to make him your permanent head coach.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he has a bright future, like you mentioned. He was thrown into a tough spot. That he was. I think the Bears made a mistake when they decided to make him the head coach. I think they should have, just let him be the play caller, let him be the offensive coordinator, and he can kind of grow a relationship with Caleb Williams. And then I always felt like the Bears put too much on his plate, having him be a first-time head coach and a first-time play caller, so who wasn't running his own offense, right? So that was tough, and he wasn't put in a good position. I do think that he has a bright future, and obviously he's interviewed for a couple OC, or is considered to be a front runner for a couple OC spots. So I think he'll be in this conversation for the years to come. But when it comes to the Bears, I don't think it's not real. I think it's probably you just talk to him, figure out what the heck happened this season and what the heck happened in the last 5 games, and you just kind of go from there.
Yeah, he had a front row seat. I think you can learn a lot from him and from that interview, probably in terms of his ideas for how he would fix the Bears. I mean, that should be useful. You got a guy who was in that role for a month. Okay, next one, Matt Campbell Iowa State head coach. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I don't think this is a real candidate. I would be shocked.
I don't know where this came from. I don't know if we really need to spend too much time on it. I would be floored if he was named the head coach of the Bears. I don't know what the experience is. I don't know, okay, maybe he worked with Brock Purdy and you can maybe make that connection or something like that. And, but that's not real. That's probably just trying to do some info and just figure things out.
Yeah, he has no NFL coaching experience. Everything since 2003 has been at the college level. Head coach at Toledo, head coach at Iowa State. I think that is, for me, that's a pass. I'm passing on that one. It sounds like you are too. Next on the list, Pete Carroll. I'm saying this is a real candidate. I think that Pete Carroll still has it in him. I think that he is got a lot more energy. I'll put it this way. I don't think he's Tony La Russa. I don't think it's going to be that type
Too
of
soon,
energy.
Sean. I don't really want to talk about that.
I know Pete Carroll would be the oldest coach in the NFL. I get that, but I do think that he's still got it. I do think that he can be the type of leader who could come in here for 3, 4, 5 years and really change your franchise, and then hopefully hand it off to somebody a little bit younger. But maybe, look, I've been saying his name since kind of the beginning, and maybe I'm just skewed by my previous thoughts. Michael, what do you think about Pete Carroll?
I think he's a real candidate. He's not, he wouldn't be at the top of my list personally, just because, not to be an ageist, but I want someone who's going to be here for the long haul with Caleb. If you're able to build something successful, and, no disrespect to Pete, I know he obviously has the energy of a 20-year-old probably, but I would like him to be around for a little bit. I don't want to do this whole, groom the next coach to be the one who's going to take over. I want the person that they hire now. And it seemed like Kevin Warren kind of wanted this too. Like, he wants this to be the coach for the future. Yeah. This isn't a stopgap. This isn't a whatever. So I think the Bears take him seriously, and they talk to him, and they kind of learn from, what did you do in Seattle? How did you approach this situation? How did you approach, how did you help build an organization that won the Super Bowl and reached another one, right? So I think he's real in that sense, but I don't think he would probably be number 5 or number 6 for me in when we kind of look down at how many guys we're saying are real candidates here.
You have him down as real or not real then?
I have him down as real.
Okay. I'm going to keep track of who we agree on. Rick is kind of with you. He says he's in the top 5. Erica says if we don't get Johnson or Machin, then Erica would like Carroll. Alan commented here. He said that Caleb wants to be coached hard, not looking for a coach to be his buddy. Yeah, that's an interesting point with any of these candidates. I mean, look, you could say that Shane Waldron was a little bit too buddy, and everybody said he was too nice. Caleb's looking for somebody who's going to coach him hard, which actually kind of flows into this next one here. Brian Flores, the Vikings defensive coordinator. I have him down as real. I put an asterisk next to that because of the whole lawsuit thing. We don't have to dive into all that super deep, but yeah, obviously he's suing the NFL for previous hiring practices. I'm at the point where I think if that was going to be a factor in him getting jobs or not, then he wouldn't have become a defensive coordinator so quickly. I mean, I think teams can get over that. I don't know where that lawsuit is going. I don't know if it's gonna, how much longer it seems like it's kind of stuck in the mud right now. I don't know what the latest is with that, but I don't think that that's going to keep him from getting a head coaching job with certain teams. Some owners might not like that. And I would understand why, but I think that he is a real candidate.
I think he's a real candidate for the Bears. I don't think he would be for me, which, obviously that's not what we're talking about. But I just think, I think based on what Caleb said, I think just with what Ryan Poles has kind of emphasized, I think there are too many questions with Brian Flores, right? I think there's just, you want to learn a lot, and you want to, see what he kind of saw in Caleb as well. Obviously, he went against him a couple of times this week with his defenses, and kind of, forced Caleb to make some mistakes, and obviously created a lot of pressure for him. But, Brian Flores is interesting because, you saw the Ryan Fitzpatrick quotes that kind of came out this week about him, and about how being like, he burned a lot of bridges. And, this is me saying, kind of summarizing what he said. He didn't say this verbatim, but it just, those types of comments and the Tua comments. And, I'm all for giving a guy a second chance, learning from mistakes and that kind of stuff. But I think the Bears are serious about him. They want to learn from him. But again, he's kind of in the Pete Carroll, tier for me, where I think a lot of candidates have to say no or go somewhere else before you get to Brian Flores.
Yeah, I mean, the Vikings defensive players love playing for him, and
yes,
and that should be considered, but that's also not the most important factor. Like we said, like Caleb Williams said, he doesn't need a coach to be his buddy, and I don't think Brian Flores is. I think the Fitzpatrick comments were super interesting, and I think a lot of coaches, Brian Flores, Matt Nagy, you could go down the list. I think a lot of coaches where it didn't work out, I'm sure they learned a lot from that first stop, and hopefully, they'll approach it a little bit differently the second time. Okay, next guy on the list. I saw a comment earlier. I forget who had it. Was asking about this guy, Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame head coach. Michael, I'm going to let you go first this time. What do you think about Marcus Freeman?
I'm really hesitant. I don't know about this one. I guess I'm curious to see if we did this on Tuesday. I feel like I would have a better grasp of this. So for the time being, I'm going to say not real. I still feel like, the smoke that was kind of around there, was it an agent trying to get, Marcus Freeman an extension? Could have been. Obviously, that game happens a lot in both college and, professional football. But I don't know, man. This run that Notre Dame's on has been really impressive. I like Marcus Freeman a lot as a coach. He's actually making Notre Dame likable for me as a football team, which is really hard for me to kind of go, understand. But I'm going to say not real. I don't think that I think Marcus Freeman likes what he's building so far at Notre Dame. And he wants to win national championships. He loves that place. He's still young. He has no NFL experience other than, trying, he was, he was in training camp with the Bears. So I'm going to say not real. I don't think it's a real candidacy, but maybe things change on Tuesday after the national championship game. And we see a report that, the Bears are going to ask to interview Marcus Freeman. So this answer could change in a week, but for right now, I'm not real.
Yeah, he is. Marcus Freeman is a former 5th-round draft pick in 2009 of the Chicago Bears. I do think that the result of that game might matter. Like if they lose, I would imagine he's definitely going back to Notre Dame. That would be my thought. If they win, maybe he's open to it. I don't know. He does seem to love his job right now, and obviously he's got Notre Dame, in its best position in over a decade. I also have him down as not a real candidate. All of that aside, he's never coached in the NFL. Like to me, it's the same thing I said with Matt Campbell. Like he doesn't have any NFL coaching experience, never as like an assistant, never as like a quality control guy, whatever. Like all of his experiences at the college level to me, and I know he played in the NFL, but I think that's different. I think you have to have some experience on an NFL coaching staff.
Yeah, I don't know how often you see that work, right? Obviously, it worked with Pete Carroll. He came up and, obviously won a championship with the Seahawks.
But he had NFL experience before that,
Yeah, he did have. Yeah, obviously, yeah, you're right. So you don't really see it work too often, and that's kind of interesting, right? But so that's why I'll say no way. I think there's obviously just the Chicago connection. Obviously, a lot of Notre Dame people. I think actually a lot of Notre Dame fans would probably say no, stay away from Marcus Freeman.
Yeah.
Like this is not this. We don't want him to go here. Like he's a terrible coach. Like why would you ever want him? But yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see what happens on Monday. Maybe that buzz builds a little bit more. But yeah, I agree. I think he's a not real candidate right now.
Okay, next on the list, Aaron Glenn, Lions defensive coordinator. I'll kick this one off. I'm saying he's a real candidate. I think he's a very real candidate. I think he's going to get a job this cycle. I know he's a defensive guy. I don't think that necessarily matters. I think much like Ben Johnson, he's had several years to work under Dan Campbell to envision what this would look like if he were to be a head coach. I think he would have a really, really good plan. I think both those Lions coordinators, and actually alphabetically, they're going to be back to back here. We got Ben Johnson next. I think both those guys are very real candidates and, have had the time to build a team up from the ground up. Like we've seen them do that with the Lions on both sides of the ball, and B, figure out what it is that they want to be as head coaches. I loved Aaron Glenn's quote this week. He said, he was asked about during his regular session before the game this weekend, he was asked about, his head coach interviews, and he said, "Look, I'm going to be me, and they're either going to like it or they're not." And I feel like that's a great approach to have. I think that he would be a guy who players would play really hard for.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he's a real candidate. I don't know, maybe he blows them away with obviously, how much of a personality he has. He seems like a great coach. He's got a lot of great experience. But I just don't know if that's what the Bears are looking for right now. And I think that to a fault or not, I think the Bears kind of think about the outside perception a little bit more than maybe some other NFL teams do. And that's an interesting conversation of, how much of a factor does the outside perception kind of go into these searches. But I think that, Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren, maybe it's not the main thing, but I think in the back of their mind, they're probably like, man, if we get another defensive coach and we're, doing this again, no matter how talented Aaron Glenn is and how great of a, coach and leader of men he is, that's not going to be a great look. And I think, that plays a factor in these things. So I think Aaron Glenn gets hired this hiring cycle. I think, he ends up maybe somewhere else. But I do think he is a real candidate with the Bears. And I think he's going to actually be a really great coach somewhere. I just think it's not the right timing or the right fit with the Bears right now.
And speaking of offense, defense, let's just pop over to the other side. Next guy is Ben Johnson. I have him as real. Michael, I mean, where are you at?
I mean, do we have to say it? I mean, he's a
very real candidate.
I've been the Ben Johnson cheerleader for the past year at this point. I mean, he's a real candidate. I think he's, this whole, he's so interesting. Just this whole coaching search is so interesting with the Tom Brady thing, with the Raiders' interest and all that stuff. It's very clear that he's Caleb's, candidate based on the prank call and the St. Brown podcast. For those who don't know, Caleb got prank called by some teenagers, and he kind of made it clear that he, would be interested in Ben Johnson. And, he didn't say exactly, Ben Johnson, but when he was talking with the St. Brown brothers, he was talking about like how he likes the coach that he has in Detroit. He brought up the Detroit game that the Bears lost on Thanksgiving. He brought up that selfishly he would like an offensive coach that he can grow with and develop with over the next years. That's Ben Johnson, right?
Ben Johnson.
And I think the biggest thing is I've seen this comment a lot and I've seen this comparison a lot. And I'm not here to tell you that Ben Johnson is guaranteed to be great. He could be a great offensive mind. He might not be a great leader. He might not be able to lead the room. But I think that the comparison to Matt Nagy and other, offensive coordinators that didn't work out happens a lot, where I think Ben Johnson is in a different sphere, right? Like Matt Nagy, when he, became the Bears coach, he was running Andy Reid's offense and he was calling games for like half the year, right? Like he wasn't calling games the whole season. Ben Johnson has been the play caller of his offense for 3 straight years, of an offense that's been top in the league in points scored, DVOA, any offensive, category you can come up with. Ben Johnson has been there. And it's been interesting to kind of hear him talk about how he's developed and thought about the process a little bit differently over the past year, where he talked about, like, in his interviews, like you mentioned, about how he thought about being more of a head coach and how he would approach things and how he would do things differently compared to last year. So he's a real candidate. He's my obviously number one candidate. And I think that if you can get Ben Johnson, I think you got the real deal, and you've got a really good thing going with him and Caleb being paired together at such a young age.
Yeah, I agree that that's what makes this really different from Nagy. First of all, like, Ben Johnson has been high on people's lists now for 2 years. Like he's been on the list. He's a guy who's been around the block. He's had time to think about what he wants this to look like. And he's run that offense. Like there's been no shadow from Dan Campbell like there was with Andy Reid and Matt Nagy, like there still is with Matt Nagy's candidacy for the Jets job and some of these other positions, if he's going to be a head coach again someday. That's, to me, what makes this really different, and why I would have a lot more confidence in Ben Johnson than in Matt Nagy a couple of years ago. I'm totally with you, Michael, with everything you said. He's a very real candidate, and he's ready to go right now. Like he's both those coordinators are going to get hired this cycle. I really do believe that.
Can we talk? And I want to talk about this whole Raiders thing. Obviously, it's really interesting because, over the past week, there's been a ton of smoke. Obviously, the Raiders fired their GM since we talked with you folks. I think that's the last time. I think that happened since. This whole Tom Brady thing is really interesting to me, just because he's very clearly leading this push, and he's obviously the reason why, reportedly, why Ben Johnson even interviewed for the job. So the whole him being, he's going to call the next few games as far as the Lions go, right, with Fox, and I think that's a really interesting conflict of interest, and I wonder whether that's going to be a complaint made by the Bears or the Jaguars or other coaches or other teams who are interested with him, because that's a blatant conflict of interest. Like, no other team gets to go to Detroit on this weekend and talk to him before the game like Brady does, right? And maybe they don't talk about the Raiders job. Maybe they're just, talking about like, hey, Ben, how you doing? How you looking forward to this matchup? What are you thinking? Like, whatever. Like, that's an unfair advantage that other teams don't have. And I think that needs to be addressed. I don't know if that needs to be a Bears, complaint. I don't know if that needs to be the NFL, but it's very clear that even though Tom Brady's a minority owner of the Raiders, that he's very involved, and there needs to be some sort of barrier put, because this can't happen.
So Tom Brady doesn't get to. It was new in the news earlier this year. Like, he does not get to do those production meetings during the week, like on Tuesday or Wednesday. Typically, the announcers would get to sit down with the coaches and the quarterbacks on Zoom or whatever, and they get to, when you hear Troy Aikman talking about some of the inside info he has on the broadcast with ESPN, like, that's where he's getting that stuff from, his conversations. Right. Tom Brady doesn't get to do that because he is a part owner. And so really the only time he would be talking to Ben Johnson would be right before the game on the field. I kind of feel like Tom Brady is such a football guy, like, get in the mindset before the game. I almost feel like he would not want to throw Ben Johnson for a loop before the game. Like, they're not going to be talking about the job or whatever. Like, I feel like they're going to be talking about this matchup right here, right now. Like, the Commanders on Saturday night. That's how I feel like, as a guy who, with Tom Brady being a guy who played in the league for so long at such a high level, I think he really respects people's competitive mindset in those hours before a game.
Yeah, I could see that. And, maybe he's not, but even that kind of feels like, you're talking about the game, right? And maybe Ben Johnson's like, oh, like, I like talking to Tom about this, and I can see this working for us if we work together. Like, even if you're not talking about the game, you're still building a relationship with the guy, and you're still building a rapport that other teams aren't able to do. So I think that's kind of maybe he's not being like, hey, Ben, what do you think about the Raiders? Like, are you going to be able to come here after you guys win or anything like that? But you still are building a rapport that, Ryan
I agree with
McCarthy aren't doing before the game or anything like that.
I do agree with that. I am still skeptical that Tom Brady coming in and owning, 5-10% of the Raiders is really going to change that franchise. Obviously, he's trying to be the face, but give that a couple of years. And I don't know that, if they don't figure out the quarterback position, it might not matter who the head coach is, and so they're still the Raiders. I still think the Bears is a better job. I don't know how you feel about that. You could make the argument that the Raiders are a blank canvas. They basically have Brock Bowers and everybody else is expendable. And you can shape that however you want. I get that. But I would still, if it was me, I would still rather go somewhere with a quarterback.
And I think it depends on what Johnson wants, right? Like, does he want a ready-made product, or does he want to build something up from the ground? Yeah. And if I'm like, personally, like, I can't pretend to know what he's thinking, but you have Caleb Williams, you've got a lot of offensive talent, you've got a ready-made defense. You just got to add some, linemen here or there, and maybe switch out some skill positions here or there. Like, you're pretty much ready to go with a few additions here or there this offseason, right? Where, the Jaguars, yes, there's no GM. You could maybe have more autonomy, but and obviously with the Raiders, it's the same thing. That's kind of down the road. But I am interested to see, I feel like there's been a lot of talk about well, Ryan Poles is here and Ben Johnson automatically hates Ryan Poles. I don't think that's the case. They could
I don't either.
I don't know. I feel like it's been viewed as a negative thing that Ryan Poles is here with the Bears, where for all we know, they can just build off of each other and work off of each other and, build a really good, and Ryan, Ben Johnson could be a good crutch for Ryan Poles, right? He could be in Detroit, we were looking for these type of linemen. This is what we should be looking for and that kind of stuff. So, we'll see where it is. There's a lot of smoke with the Raiders. I think that's smoke, and I don't know how much fire there is to that. So it'll be really interesting to see. But to cap things off, yes, Ben Johnson is a very real candidate. And as you can tell from our talking about it, he seems like both of our number one, if not number two candidate for this job.
Yeah, we blew past the time allotment on that one. Not that there is one, but we definitely blew past it. Let's fly through a couple of these. Vance Joseph, Broncos defensive coordinator. I say not real. Not real. Okay. Mike Kafka, Giants offensive coordinator. Michael, what do you think?
I'm going to say not real. I think Mike obviously is St. Rita guy, a Northwestern guy. He's got a good mindset and he's got a good scheme. I just don't think I would like to see it more as an offensive coordinator kind of moving forward. And we've talked about it in the past, how much of the Giants, poor offensive, numbers do you put on Mike Kafka? I wouldn't put much of any on him, honestly. But I think I'm going to say not real for the time being. I think he's got a bright future, but for the time, I don't think he's a serious candidate.
I am with you. I say not real. I do think that the Chicago connections are intriguing. He's a good
Brian Bowles loves his Chicago connections.
Coach. They love their Chicago connections. They signed a bunch of dudes the last couple of years with Chicago connections. But I don't know if that's going to be enough to hire him as a head football coach. I think kind of like Joe Brady. I want to see more. I want to see another year or two as a coordinator. I want to see what he can do with a young quarterback who's not Daniel Jones and maybe what they can build. Who knows if they're only going to get one more year in New York with that coaching staff, but see what he can do this next year with whoever they bring in. Okay. Cliff Kingsbury, I put him down as not real as well. I kind of just feel like he's going to return to Washington. I don't know. What do you think, Michael?
I think he's a not real candidate just based on, this is me looking into the situation, but I remember when the Bears, were playing the Commanders and he talked about that and he didn't really want to talk about the interview process or anything he didn't want to touch that. Yeah. This is me kind of looking into it. I don't know anything for certain, but maybe there's some bad blood about not being hired, the reasoning why he wasn't hired or anything like that. So I'm going to say it's a not real candidacy. Just based on maybe there's some hard feelings about how the OC interview process went last year. And I could see that kind of playing a factor. I think he's a talented play caller. His reputation has kind of been fast starts, and you've kind of seen that, the Commanders have won games in the last minute, but the offense hasn't kind of kept up to the same numbers they had at the beginning of the year. So if I was running the search, I would talk to him, but I still want to see more from him based on his time with the Commanders and the Cardinals.
Yeah, I mean, if Washington, if the offense is still clicking next season and it looks like it did this year, maybe he's going to keep getting chances. And I think that I do feel like he'll probably get another chance at some point to be a head football coach in the NFL. I just don't know if after 1 year as a coordinator, that's going to be the time. The report from Ian Rappaport last night, or he threw out a tweet that mentioned Kingsbury's not doing interviews this week. He's focusing on the game against the Lions, and that could kind of put him behind the eight ball a little bit, at least for a couple more days. If the Commanders lose on Saturday against Detroit, which they are, that's going to be a tough one going on the road at Ford Field. Obviously, then he'll be interviewing next week, I would imagine. But yeah, I kind of just feel like this is leaning toward Cliff is going to return to Washington. He doesn't necessarily have to jump at the first job that comes around. Now, obviously, he has previous experience with Caleb Williams, and that matters. But I do wonder, these guys, this team just passed you over for that offensive coordinator job. I don't know if he's going to want to walk into that a year later.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's I think he's still got a little bit to prove. Like you said, I think he's talented and obviously he knows what he's doing. I just want to see it for a longer duration because the Cardinals stint kind of, put a bad taste in my mouth. And I've seen some good things, but I kind of want to see it for a longer time with the Commanders.
Okay, next on our list, Mike McCarthy, former Cowboys head coach. We kind of touched on it earlier. I do think he's a real candidate. I think, look, he wins. He's won a lot of places. He's got 12 playoff appearances in 18 years or something like that. I know there was Aaron Rodgers obviously helped do that when he was at his peak. Dak Prescott obviously makes a difference. But I do think that he could instantly like raise the floor, and you can debate whether or not he's going to be a difference maker in the postseason. Obviously, he wasn't that for the Cowboys. Michael, what do you think about Mike McCarthy right now?
I think he's a real candidate, and I'll just say he's a candidate for me where if the Bears end up hiring him, I'm like, okay. I'm kind of like, I obviously we want Ben Johnson. Obviously, you want the top of the top. But it's kind of like for me, I'm kind of like you could do worse, right? Like it's kind of like funny to me. Like it's kind of interesting to me to hear, and I know the Packers probably play a role in this, but Mike McCarthy led the Cowboys to 3 straight 12-win seasons. Yeah. When's the last time the Bears did that? Like I feel like I feel like a lot of Bears fans are like, well, he won 12 games and like won a playoff game, or like look, but they didn't go as far as they wanted to, and like that's a level that the Bears haven't seen in like forever. Like when's the last time the Bears had consistent like playoff appearances and we're consistently pushing for the playoffs, right? So yeah, I get it. I obviously you want to go for the top of the top. But if the Bears end up with Mike McCarthy, I'm kind of like left with the shrug, and I'm like, okay, like you'll have a strong leader. His players love him. He was able to do, obviously, he helped develop Aaron Rodgers. He kind of helped take Dak Prescott to another level. Obviously, he was a runner-up for the MVP last year. His only bad year with the Cowboys was because, that they got injured guys this past year, right? And obviously that loss to the Packers a year ago, that was bad. That wasn't a good look for McCarthy by any means, but I'm kind of in a position where like, he's not my top candidate, but you could do a lot worse. And I think you'd have a lot of stability.
Thomas Gage, welcome Thomas. In the comments, he said Ben Johnson or bust. He also said no on Mike McCarthy. Alan Dunlop says McCarthy is real, but doesn't excite me. And Mike Johnson in the next comment says Mike McCarthy, meh. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of how a lot of Bears fans feel right now. Just kind of taking the temperature of the room. And that's kind of what you're saying, Michael. Like it's not the exciting, explosive hire. It's not the next new shiny object. But yeah, he wins and you can't ignore that. Okay, we got a handful more to get to here. We're running out of time, but Todd Monken, I have him down, the Ravens offensive coordinator. I have him down as a very real candidate. He also has Illinois ties. He grew up in Wheaton. He's his brothers and cousins, his whole family, they're all football coaches. And so Todd Monken has really revived Lamar Jackson's MVP candidate. Helped him win the MVP last year. He's in the running again this year after Greg Roman's offense was pretty boring for the Ravens the previous years before that. I have him down as a real candidate. He's super interesting because he's just like done everything. He's been a defensive backs coach. He's been an assistant at the college, the NFL. He's been a head coach at the college level for a couple of years. I think he has a kind of a well-rounded experience in the world of football. I think he could potentially make a pretty good head coach. I have him as a real candidate. What do you think?
I have him as a real candidate, and he's actually a candidate for me who's kind of risen in my power rankings the more I've kind of learned about him. You have Lamar Jackson. That obviously helps. But I think he's played a major role in Lamar becoming this MVP guy, right? Like, obviously, we still need to see it in the playoffs, and we still need to see that consistency translate to like a championship level. But, Monken's kind of won everywhere he went. He's won a couple of championships with Georgia as their offensive coordinator. He's led I think it was a Conference USA program, right, as a head coach. He has
Southern Miss, I think was
I think that's what it was. And you've seen him succeed in the NFL as too, and he's obviously running a great offense with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore right now. So the more I've learned about him, the more I like about him, and I think I'm kind of at a level where I would probably have him as my number. I think I would have him as my number 2. I would have him above McCarthy. Obviously, you want Ben Johnson, but if you end up with Monken, I'd be intrigued. I'd be really interested. You've got a lot of experience, at different levels. He's run the room. Obviously, he hasn't run an entire football, locker room. Obviously, he's only been on the offensive side, but there's
at the NFL level,
yeah, and there's a lot to like about him. So I'm really intrigued by him, and I think that he's a very real candidate.
I think the Bears, like we said with Mike Kafka, I feel like the Bears like the Illinois connections. They like the Chicago area connections. I think that matters too. That matters to the McCaskies a little bit. He's just such an interesting candidate. Yeah, I didn't even mention that and all this stuff. He was the coordinator for Georgia when they won back-to-back national titles. Like, he's just done all these different things that just make him a really interesting candidate. He was the coordinator back in I think it was 2011 when Brandon Weeden and Oklahoma State were like a top 5 team in college football. Like, he's been around the block, even though he's relatively like kind of blown up these last 2 years with the Ravens. Like, he is not necessarily like a new name in NFL circles. Like, these guys know of him. We got 5 more. I'm not gonna lie, Michael. I have them all as not real. I'm gonna. We can kind of blow through these unless you have a different opinion. Drew Petzing, Arizona Cardinals offensive coordinator. Not real. David Shaw, former Stanford head coach.
No,
not real. I don't see that. Arthur Smith. This is maybe the one that we do want to touch on a little bit. He's a Steelers coordinator now, obviously the former Falcons head coach. I say not real. What do you say, Michael?
I guess I would say with everyone else that there is, I would probably say not real. I don't think he has the same results as the other candidates have, right? Like, I think you've got, obviously he had a strong start with Pittsburgh, but you saw how that offense, tapered off in the playoffs and toward the end of the year. So with everything else that you have, I would probably, I don't know where we're at this point. I would probably have him in the 10 range, 10, 11 range. Like, you talk to him, that kind of learn some stuff, get some background. But I don't think he's a true, real candidate for the top job.
I know this doesn't really matter, and I'm definitely, you and I are biased because we are members of the media, but just the way he approaches his media sessions just turns me off. I just don't like that. But obviously that's not the most important thing either.
It matters.
It matters. And I don't know, just some of the decisions, the weird things he did with Bijan Robinson last year and drafting a tight end number 4 who in Kyle Pitts, who has 1,000-yard season as a rookie, and then you just don't use him the next year. Like, things like that. It's just like some of the decisions were just weird. And, 3 straight 7-10 seasons as a head coach of the Falcons, that doesn't get me all that excited. Maybe if there was at least Nagy in his candidacy, at least Nagy has a blip where, they won 12 games and went to the playoffs. I don't see that when I look at Arthur Smith.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a not real candidate. I think, that ended up happening. I can't imagine what our podcast is going to be like and what the reaction was going to be like. Yeah, I don't think it's a real candidacy. You just kind of talk to him and just kind of get some info around the league and just kind of see what you're doing.
Alan, thanks for the comment, Alan. I knew I would miss one. Ron Rivera, we're going alphabetically, so we missed the R's. Ron Rivera, I say, oh man, this is tough. I say not real. I don't know. That one is really tough for me. I just feel like, I don't know. I don't know. The Bears, obviously they love the 85 Bears, and that would make a great story if he's able to come here and turn it around. I just don't know if that's the direction they're going to go. I'm going to say not real.
That one for me felt like I'm kind of imagining you got Ryan Poles, Kevin Warren, and George McCaskey in a room, and everyone's shouting out names or whatever. And then George is like, what about Ron Rivera? He was an 85 Bear. Yeah. He was our DC when we went to the Super Bowl. And I think, Ron's a great coach. Obviously, he's done a lot of great things. He, obviously helped develop Cam Newton into an MVP. He took the Panthers to the Super Bowl. He had a pretty bad situation with the Commanders that I don't really blame him for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, could it be a thing where you're kind of I don't know if they would approach it this way, but is it a thing where you talk to him, you're like, listen, Ron, we're probably looking at, different candidates, but would you consider being our DC? Would you, Ron, if you for me, I'm kind of if you pair Ben Johnson with Ron Rivera, I'm all in on that. You kind of have that experienced guy who's been in the room. You make him an assistant head coach or something like that. He leads your defense, and he provides leadership and kind of wisdom for Ben Johnson as he kind of takes over and kind of becomes a first-time head coach. So I think he's a not real candidate for the head coaching spot, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears are kind of listen, Ben, you can hire whoever you want, but Ron Rivera doesn't seem like too bad of an assistant head coach / DC.
And yeah, that's a great point. And I see some folks in the comments saying that. Rick says Rivera with McCarthy. CJ says Ben Johnson, Rivera. Yeah, like I could see that being super intriguing for Ron Rivera too. Like, at this point, he's been a head coach twice. I don't know how many more interviews other than a team like the Bears, who he played for, how many other teams are going to give him another chance. That could be super intriguing, whether he's a DC or even if you don't take it that far and say, okay, just be like a senior consultant. Like I could absolutely see that being the way that this goes with Ron Rivera. But yeah, I don't see him as a serious head coaching candidate at this point. Okay, we got two more on the list. Adam Stenovich, Packers OC. I say not real.
Not real. That one came in so late too, where you're just kind of like, why? Like, what are you have enough candidates? Like, you're going to get enough info. Like, are you just trying to be like, yo, what's going on? Like, what does LaFleur like to run? Like, what are some things we
trying to get some intel?
LaFleur? Like, yeah, that's just kind of what that interview felt like. It was kind of like, all right, why are we doing this?
Well, they're already interviewing coordinators for the Lions and the Vikings. You might as well get some intel on the Packers too.
Yeah, that's true.
Anthony Weaver. This is the last one on our list. Dolphins defensive coordinator. I say not real. What do you say, Michael?
Yeah, I say not real. I don't. It's tough sledding if you're a defensive coach for this coaching search already. But Anthony Weaver's defense have been fine, right? Like they're okay.
Yeah.
Like they're not top tier defenses. Maybe maybe he's a great leader of men and all the stereotypes and all the quotes you want to use or whatever cliches. I'm going to say, yeah, I don't think he's a real candidate, especially for what the Bears are looking for.
Interesting comment here from Mike Johnson. Did the Bears consider any special teams coordinators? No, there are none on this list. So that is an interesting point. Obviously, every time these hiring cycles come up, we talk about how special teams coordinators should be considered more, but obviously the Bears haven't done that. So I haven't seen a whole lot of that going on either from some of these other teams. Michael, these are the coaches that we both agreed are real candidates. Joe Brady, Pete Carroll, Brian Flores, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, Mike McCarthy, and Todd Monken. Thoughts?
Those are probably all going to be the guys that they kind of bring to the second round, right? Like maybe you cut a couple people.
Cut one or two, maybe.
Yeah, but those seem to be the guy. Like I've heard some reports. I think David Schultz put it out there that it seems to be a 2-horse race between Ben Johnson or Mike McCarthy. I don't know if you can go that far. A name that we didn't mention, and I don't think they ever put in an interview request. They never put in a request to interview Liam Cohen, right? Like it seems like they're just
no. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, that one's kind of interesting because he was a hot name when we were in the middle of the season, when we were looking at head coaching candidates, but. Those are probably the guys that they're going to bring in for a second interview, right? And I think the biggest thing is how many guys are they bringing in for that second round? Are they going to fly them all in? Like this whole process is really interesting to me because I feel like people were like, well, why are you doing Zoom interviews for the first whatever? Like, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you whatever? But I've been okay with the way that they're doing this. I'm fine with it. Get the intel, go through some things, get some basic stuff, fly in your 5, 6, 7 finalists, bring them in, talk to them, wine and dine them and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think that's how the process is going to go. And it's going to become clear that this is going to take a while, guys. Like, I think the next time we talk to you guys, we're not going to have a coach the next time. Like, it's very clear that the NFL has made this a priority. They want to draw this out. They want to give everyone a fair advantage. They don't want any lawsuits or anything like that. I think this is going to be a long process. And, next week seems to be like, well, we're kind of be like, all right, here's a cuts list. People can start coming in after the 20th. And I wouldn't be surprised if we end up hearing that those guys are the guys that are going to come in to hell us all in the next couple of weeks.
And keep in mind, if the coaches, the coordinators whose teams win this weekend will not be doing in-person interviews next week. That is going to have to wait until after the conference championship game. So if the Bills win, Joe Brady won't be doing that. If the Lions win, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, those guys won't be doing that. The Ravens, Todd Monken, same thing. So some of these candidates are going to take a little while if they want to do an in-person interview with the Bears, if the Bears want to do an in-person interview with them. I imagine a couple of those teams we just mentioned are probably going to win their football games this weekend and be playing in the conference championship. just something to keep in mind as we move ahead here. Okay, we've run past our time, but this has been fun, Michael. I've enjoyed discussing these candidates with you. One more time, hit the thumbs up if you're with us here live on YouTube. There's the thumb. We really appreciate that. Head to shawlocal.com. Read all of our coverage over there. That is the number one best way to support us. Please consider subscribing. If you're listening after the fact on Spotify or Apple, leave us a review. We would really appreciate that. And keep an eye on our Twitter pages. We'll let you know when we're going live. We're going to do another show next week sometime. Maybe we'll do it again on Friday. We'll have to see what shakes out this week. Keep an eye on our Twitter pages, at Sean_Hammond, at MDwojak94. We're going to let you know when we're going live. He's Michael Dwojak. I'm Sean Hammond. This has been the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great weekend.